All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Uh, this is the third and final webinar out of three webinar series of Introduction to Bird Monitoring webinars that Mushkegowuk Council Lands and Resources Department is hosting in collaboration with Birds Canada and Planky Canada. My name is Hope Hill, and I'm the Carbon Biodiversity Projects Coordinator with the Lands and Resources Department of the Council. The goal behind bringing these webinars to you is it's breeding and migration season for birds during full spring, and we want to provide a opportunity to be able to connect different people together to be able to learn and network about bird monitoring resources and tools. So today our third webinar is titled Bird Surveying, Collection Methods, Data Uses, and Resources for First Nations. And it is going to be hosted by Planky Canada with speakers from Birds Canada and ECCC. So with that, I will pass it along then to get us started.
Thanks, Hope. I am somehow, okay, there we go. Can people see our screen?
Yeah,
Great.
looks good on my end.
Thank you. I'm gonna just move along. Hope introduced us. Thank you, Hope, and thank you for hosting this presentation. We're really excited to be able to present. So I'm Sharon Kimberly. I should have put introductions. We're gonna cover the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, other bird surveys, how to use and access data, and then about the Two-Eyed Seeing to Share Knowledge of Ontario Breeding Birds project, which is a way for First Nations and other Indigenous organizations and communities to access resources to support bird-related projects. So, hand over to Kaylin to introduce herself.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon. Hi, I'm Kaylin. I work for Birds Canada as the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas project manager. And essentially what my bio is trying to get at is that I love birds and I love people and I love the way that birds bring people together. So I feel very fortunate, to be working on this project alongside so many great volunteers and staff and partners, and just really enjoy it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Burrell. Very excited to be here today. I'm the coordinator for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. I took that role on at the start of last year, and I'm on loan to Environment and Climate Change Canada to do that role. With Kaylin, her and I basically are the two main people running the Atlas, so it's great. I enjoy working with her, and just like her, I really love working on anything related to birds and nature. I've had a lot of great luck in my career to be able to do that. And I also really love the concept of citizen science. I've been a citizen scientist myself since I was a little kid. So it's an awesome project. I'm so excited to work on the Atlas project. Normally I work for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and I'm based out of Peterborough, where I live with my wife and my two small kids. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Mike and Kaylin. So I'm Sharon Kimberly, and I grew up, and now I'm happy to say I moved back to Robinson Huron Treaty Lands, just north of Parry Sound. And I grew up outside. I just love being outside, and I was deeply affected by seeing what's been happening in our environment and invasive species and declines. But I was also affected by Truth and Reconciliation findings, and it hurt my heart, and I felt like I wanted to do something. So this job, hopefully in some small way, if I can contribute to reconciliation and if I can contribute to some kind of climate action, that's my motivation for doing this work. And like Kaylin and Mike, I love working with people, love getting outside, and I'm really growing to love birds, not being a birding expert, but now I'm really starting to pay attention, which is also just really added to my enjoyment of being outside. I'm going to hand it over now to Kaylin, who's going to start off our introduction to the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas.
Excellent. Great. Thanks so much, Sharon. So what is the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas? Some folks may just be hearing about it for the first time. So the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, which started in 2021 for our data collection, is a collaborative initiative that aims to map the distribution and relative abundance of our around 300 species of breeding birds. We kind of alluded to this in our own introductions, but it is a community science project. And that means that we have a bunch of volunteers contributing data all across the province. This project really would not be possible without the thousands of people participating. So the Atlas 3 data is going to help us better understand how breeding bird populations have changed since the past two atlases in the 80s and early 2000s, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and will help guide our conservation efforts for birds and their habitats. So on to the next slide. So like I mentioned, this is our third atlas. The first atlas happened in the 80s, and these atlases take around 5 years for data collection and happen every 20 years. So Atlas 1 was in the 80s, 81 to 85. Atlas 2 happened from 2001 to 2005. And then this third atlas started in 2021, and we're going to wrap up data collection by the end of next year. And so some things that we can do with this data are compare back to previous atlases, kind of like I mentioned in the last slide. So these maps are from Atlas 2, the publication of Atlas 2 in the 2000s. It's showing the distribution map for cliff swallows between Atlas 2 and Atlas 1. So on that bottom map, you can see those black dots are where cliff swallows were found in the first atlas in the 80s and not in the second atlas, so essentially where they had disappeared. And then the yellow dots are where they were found in Atlas 2, but not Atlas 1, so where they were just found for the first time. So we can make these sorts of comparisons between atlases, and this is the sort of thing that we're planning on doing for Atlas 3 as well. Next slide, please. This is another excerpt from Atlas 2, comparing Atlas 2 to Atlas 1 again. So on the left, we're seeing the increase in the number of squares that certain species were found in. So the biggest increase is probably not surprising to most folks, but it's the Canada goose, found in over 1,000 more squares in Atlas 2 than in Atlas 1. Obviously a huge increase. On the right-hand side, we see the biggest decreases between atlases. So those folks who are familiar with aerial insectivores, so birds that eat flying insects while they're flying, will see a lot of familiar names on there. So common nighthawk, chimney swift, bank swallow are all aerial insectivores that are showing the greatest declines between the second atlas and the first atlas. Next slide, please. So what are our goals for this third atlas? Well, we want to determine and map the distribution and relative abundance of breeding birds, as I mentioned before, but we want to compare back to previous atlases, so compare back to Atlas 2 and to Atlas 1, determine their population size and compare to previous atlases, gather data on breeding locations and abundance for significant species. So one thing that's new for Atlas 3 is that we're able to pinpoint exact locations of significant species or species at risk, colonial species, or species that we're kind of looking out for that might be on the decline, so that we can attribute their exact location to potential habitat and increase our conservation efforts that way. We also want to ensure that the data are available for conservation projects. So looking at the effects of climate change, effects of protected areas. I'll talk a little bit more about the applications of Atlas data later on in this presentation. Next slide, please. So Ontario is a big place. It is quite massive, as we are all too familiar with trying to cover, the entire province. And so what we do is we divide the province up into 47 regions. So you can see all of the regions there on that farthest left map there. The middle map is showing just one of those regions, the region that I highlighted in the first one. And so each region is divided up into 10 by 10 kilometer squares. And that's kind of how we try to focus our data collection efforts and our goals, which Mike will talk about next. And so the farthest right map is just one of those 10 by 10 kilometer square maps. Next slide, please. So in each of these squares, we want a certain amount of data collection to be completed. And the way that we collect that data is by doing checklists and point counts. So a checklist, or what we call general atlasing, is where you record all the birds that you saw or heard. You could be going on a hike. You could do it just in your backyard. It could be anywhere. So there's no predetermined locations. It could be stationary or it could be traveling. It can be any duration, but usually shorter checklists are a little bit better. And then anyone can contribute at their level. So even if you're new to birding, new to atlasing, you can still contribute by doing this general atlasing or checklists. Point counts, on the other hand, are, again, where you record all the birds that you saw or heard, but they're mostly at predetermined locations. So on the map on the right, you can see that station 1, 2, and 3, those would be point counts at predetermined locations that are kind of randomly assigned. They're stationary, so you just go to the point, you record all the birds that you see and hear for 5 minutes, and you do need a little bit higher bird identification skills to do point counts, or you could use technology to help you if you're newer to birding and you want to do some point counts. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about some of that technology. So for the point counts, you can do digital point counts. So that's where you take a Zoom H2N, which is a little recording device, with you in the field to do your 5-minute checklist or 5-minute point count, sorry. So it's a manual in-person recording. You take it to the point count station, you set it up, you wait the 5 minutes, and then you take it home with you. It's a really good option for recording many sites in a season, so you just take it from place to place, and it's great for predefined points. On the other hand, there are also autonomous recording units, or ARUs, which some folks might be familiar with. And that's the picture on the right. That's a song meter. It's a programmable recording device. So you can program it ahead of the season. You can deploy it, strap it to a tree, and it will come on for whenever you have set it to do so. They're usually deployed for longer periods. So obviously, if you're getting out, strapping it to a tree, it's a little bit of a longer timeline. And it can be deployed in the off season and programmed to have a delayed start. So if you're snowmobiling in, strapping it to the tree and going out, you can always pick it up after the season is done. So both of those obviously give us some audio files that we store, upload and store in WildTracks. And then interpreters, so expert bird identifiers, essentially, listen to the recordings to identify the bird species. Some abundance information can be determined. So on the Zoom H2N, there's 2 separate microphones, so you can get, an abundance that way, and the same sort of thing on the song meter as well. Next slide. All right, passing this one off to Mike now.
All right, thanks, Kaylin. So I'm just going to continue on giving you some background about the Atlas. So Kaylin kind of alluded to it a couple times when it comes to our coverage. We have coverage goals in the province, and we vary those goals based on where you are in the province. So in the southern Ontario, that really the darkest green there, we're aiming to get 100% of those 10 by 10K squares covered. We've got a lot more people in that part of the province, a lot more people that are good at getting out and doing atlasing and birding. So it's still a challenging target to meet 100% coverage, but easier to accomplish there. In the middle band there, basically the roaded part of Northern Ontario, we're looking to get 5% of all of our squares covered. And then in the roadless north, in the yellowy green shaded color in the furthest north section there, we're aiming for 2% of squares to be covered. And when we say we want a square covered, our goal is to get 20 hours of effort during the peak season. So that peak season varies slightly depending on where you are. In the south, it starts a week earlier on May 24th, and it starts June 1st in the north. And both sections of the province. Our peak season that we've defined goes till July 10th. So we want those 20 hours. So that's spread over 5 years of the atlas. So it's only 4 hours per year, but it adds up to the 20 hours, and that we use that. That way we have enough coverage to know, well, we probably missed a couple species, but we probably have a pretty good representation of what's there. The other facet of getting adequate coverage is the 25 completed point counts. Kaylin talked a little bit about those predefined locations, basically stationary for 5 minutes, and those are completed by either people who are experts and able to identify everything they see or hear, or else people with the Zoom handheld units that can be interpreted later. We do have lots of other ways that we get coverage. We have special survey protocols for birds like owls and marsh birds and nightjars like nighthawks and whippoorwills that are hard to detect sort of in normal survey methods, but we'll not talk too much about that today. There's lots of little details we could get into with the atlas, and we're trying to keep things fairly high level. So next. There we go. So focusing in on the northern part of the province especially, we group our squares into what we call blocks. Blocks are just 100 by 100 kilometers, so there's 100 squares, 100 of those 10 by 10K squares per block. And so when we say we want 2% or 5% coverage in a part of the province, what we really mean is we want 2 out of every 100 squares covered in one of those blocks. So we do have some priority squares that we prioritize. Those are the ones shown in red and orange on this map. Hard to tell them apart, but the red and orange are squares that had good coverage in Atlas 2, which happened 20 years ago. So those are priorities for us to cover again if we can. But if not possible, then it's fine to cover some other squares in that block. You'll probably be able to recognize a lot of river routes, especially in the northern part of the province, based on where those priority squares are, because a lot of the coverage that happened in the most remote part of Ontario happened by canoe trip volunteers going down rivers on canoe trips in Atlas 2. Next.
Can I ask a question before you change slides?
Yeah, just gonna say, I see Vicky with her hand up there.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the colors are not great to tell the difference in coverage. Or which one's the priority squares? Can you maybe circle some examples so we like
Yeah.
I can't even tell the difference between the colors hardly.
Yeah, you don't really need to worry about the difference between the red and the orange tiny squares. The orange are medium priority, so they might not have had quite as good a coverage in Atlas 2 versus the red being high priority because we had really good coverage in Atlas 2. The main thing I wanted to get across in this slide is that we do have these things that we call priority squares. And they're priorities because they had some or really good coverage 20 years ago. And if we can get to them, if it's possible to get to them, then those are the priorities to cover again in Atlas 3, but it doesn't always have to be those exact ones. And thank you for whoever is circling a couple of those priority squares.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's just, I'm thinking, there might be some potential to get some coverage this year, and certainly we could plan for next year. So maybe that's something we can follow up on.
Absolutely.
And maybe structure some efforts in the north area. There's quite a few people here that might want to participate.
Awesome. That would be great.
And thanks, Vicky. I learned on the spot how to do a circle on a PowerPoint while I'm presenting. So, I feel good.
Excellent. New tools.
Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. I can't see the chat while I'm talking, so don't hesitate to interrupt somebody if needed. So I mentioned those canoe trips. So Kaylin talked about it in her slides as well. The Atlas is really run by volunteers. Well, it's coordinated by a couple people like Kaylin and I, and then it's really the power of volunteers that gets most of the coverage done. And so each year of the Atlas, starting in the second year, 2022, we've been able to provide support to volunteers who want to do remote trips into Northern Ontario. So they're able to go out and do a really fun vacation for them. They're all doing it as volunteers basically, and they get to go on an amazing canoe trip down one of these rivers. And the Atlas is able to provide some financial support for them to be able to do that. So that's the way we're able to get a lot of this coverage in these blocks that you see colored here, and we're able to support 5 trips that are going in different rivers into Northern Ontario this summer as well. I'm always very jealous to see their photos and hear about their trips, because they're really amazing trips. Okay, next slide. And then the other way that we're getting coverage this time around in the far north is through the use of the autonomous recording units that Kaylin mentioned earlier. There's a huge number that have been deployed over the first 3 years of the Atlas, about 200 to 300 per year, deployed across the region you see on the map. All those little black dots are places where these ARUs have been deployed. These are deployed by Environment and Climate Change Canada's Canadian Wildlife Service staff with support from the Provincial Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And most of these are deployed by helicopter early in the season, so sometime in May usually, and then they're retrieved in the fall, in September or October, again by helicopter. But as Kaylin said, they could be deployed in other places in the province by snow machine, or by canoe, or by foot, however makes sense. But these are really going to change, and they already are changing, what we know about birds in this part of the province. If you think back to some of those previous slides, and what I've said earlier is a lot of our coverage in Atlas 2 in this part of the province happened along either the coast or along major rivers that are easy to travel along by canoe. But with this new technology, we're able to get coverage into places that's very difficult to get to by a human being on foot or by canoe in this part of the province. So we're definitely learning about birds that have different ranges than we thought, and we're getting all sorts of cool stuff that I cannot wait to be able to dig into. Okay, I think that's it. So that's our quick primer on the Atlas. Kaylin and I could talk for a couple days about the Atlas, but we wanted to cover some other bird surveys as well. So I'm gonna keep talking for a couple more minutes, and we're gonna go into a few really big, important bird survey projects that happen not just in Ontario, but a lot of these are happening across the country or the Western Hemisphere or beyond. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the Christmas bird count. So this citizen science project, again, this one was started in 1900. So this is the longest running citizen science project that we've got in North America, collecting information on birds. There's more than 2,000 locations in the Western Hemisphere that run Christmas bird counts. The way a Christmas bird count kind of happens is there's a standard circle. So it's 15 miles diameter, or roughly 25 kilometers. So you can see on the map, those are all little circles. And the survey happens on one day within the count period that happens December 14th to January 5th every year. There's about 135 that happen each year in Ontario. People go out on that count day. Usually there's a count coordinator that sort of coordinates where everybody's going to count within the circle that day. And then everybody goes out to their designated areas so that they're not all counting the exact same birds. Make a list of all the birds they're able to see and hear that day, and then you compile the results into the counts totals for that day, and then they're sent on and incorporated into this bigger Christmas bird count project. And when you've got more than 2,000 of these and they've been running for decades, it becomes a really important early winter census of what's happening with the continent's bird populations. So this project is run by the National Audubon Society and coordinated in Canada by Birds Canada. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show an example of some of the data outputs that we're able to gather. So we've got Canada Jay here, and The map is showing the different trends that come from Christmas bird count information about how this species is doing. So anything in red is bad, and it's showing declines over the long term. And you can see on the little graph in the bottom right, this species is declining according to Christmas bird count information at an annual rate of about 2% per year based on Christmas bird count data. And it's only a few states and provinces where it's in the positive with the shade of blue. So this is a very important citizen science project that happens here. And there's always room for more Christmas bird count circles to be added in places where there's people who are interested in helping out. All right, next one.
Can you tell us how you go about adding Christmas bird count, just really briefly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. It's super easy. So assuming it's here, you would reach out to Birds Canada. So they have somebody on staff who is the Christmas bird count coordinator. Their name is Yusuf Atia, but you can find the contact information on the Birds Canada Christmas bird count website. And you just say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'd like to set up a new Christmas bird count circle in this location. And Yusuf's going to ask you a few more questions. They want to make sure they know where the circle is going to go. And they also want to make sure that the circle is going to be run for more than just the 1 year. They don't want to set it up. Thank you, Graham, for posting that. That's great. There's the link in the chat for more information. But yeah, they want to make sure that it's not going to just be run for 1 year. So some assurance that you're there or somebody's there to keep it going for a few years. But it's pretty straightforward. You just need a location and somebody who's willing to kind of take the reins on that particular count.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, next one is the Breeding Bird Survey, also called BBS. And the BBS was started in 1966. There are over 4,100 routes in Canada and the continental US. It's a road-based survey, so you'll notice a very distinct trend of where those routes are shown on this map. It's where there are roads that are easily accessible, and they have to be long enough for one of these routes. So the route needs to be 40 kilometers at least. There's 50 stops along the route that are spaced about 800 meters apart. The survey is conducted on 1 day within the breeding season, so basically June here in Ontario. And each of those 50 stops is 3 minutes long. It's a 3-minute point count. So a stationary stop where you record all the birds you can see or hear. So that really needs to be done by somebody who's an expert in bird identification. They need to know all the birds by sight and sound. There are about 140 routes in Ontario, and this project, because it's been running for a long time, since the 1960s, and we've got a lot of different routes across at least southern Canada and then the United States. This is really probably our most important source for trends of breeding bird populations at the continental level. So it's very important data for us. It's coordinated by the USGS and Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Birds Canada provides quite a lot of support for that in Canada when it comes to recruiting volunteers and things like that. Next page. So I pulled up an example. This is Canada warbler, and this figure here comes from the recent status assessment of this species that was put out by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. So it's a couple years old, but this is the BBS trends for this species in Canada, showing decline, similar rate of decline as the Canada jay we just saw, of about 2% per year since 1970. But the good news is it has shown a bit of a positive trend over the last 5 or 10 years. So as a result, this species was uplisted or downlisted from, or uplisted depending on your perspective. It was changed from threatened status to special concern, which is better for the bird in terms of we know it's doing better than we thought it was 10 or 15 years ago when it was last assessed. Okay, go on to the next project. So the next citizen science project I wanted to mention was eBird. And eBird is a lot less of a structured survey than those last two projects I talked about. It's also quite a lot newer. So it started in 2002, and the eBird Canada side of things was started in 2007. Unlike those other projects, this is an anywhere, anytime kind of thing, and all skills are certainly welcome. It's really a lot like the Atlas in terms of you go and hike a trail, or you stand in one place and you just keep track of the birds you see in here, and then you can submit that list to eBird. There's a ton of data that rolls into eBird every year. In total in Ontario, there's almost 4 million records, and almost 50,000 people have submitted at least one observation. It's really great for finding out where a species is found. This map here is the white-throated sparrow map, showing all the records that are in eBird. The darker purple just means that it's a higher frequency of reports in that general area. And then the gray spots are places where people have submitted some information to eBird, but not a white-throated sparrow yet. And eBird is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. And in Canada, it's also coordinated by Birds Canada. Next slide.
Sorry, another question.
Yeah.
Back on that eBird. So like if I want to go out later today or tomorrow morning and contribute to eBird, I can just download an app or something and then start adding information as I wander around the bush.
Yeah, it's that easy. Same with Atlas. You have to register, obviously, and then you've got an app that you can go out and it, you hit start checklist, and it knows where you are. It thinks the GPS in your phone, and it knows what day and what time it is, and it can even run a track for you to keep track of how far you walked or how long you're out. And then you just, you see a white-throated sparrow, you put one white-throated sparrow. If you see another one, you add one. So it is really easy to use. It's because it's this unstructured. It's harder for us to use the information through sort of like traditional techniques. But as I say here, it really is becoming increasingly important for us to understand trends in bird populations as people figure out very complex ways to analyze that data.
All right, and you said see birds, but you can hear them too, right? You don't have to actually see them. Great, Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So as I said, it's becoming more important, a more important source for us for looking at trends in bird populations over time. Partly because the eBird data has been around for long enough now that we're able to start looking at changes, but also people of, way smarter people than me have started to figure out how to do that. I really do not understand how they do it, but that is not my job to understand. So they've got an awesome science page on the eBird website that can take you to this sort of information. These are the trend maps for most of the species are out there now. So this is the white-throated sparrow trend map. And those red dots are ones where the abundance trend over the last 10 years is negative. The darker the red, the worse the trend. And then blue are ones where it's showing a positive trend. So over most of eastern Ontario and western Quebec, it's, according to eBird, we're seeing decreasing trends, unfortunately, for this species, even though it might be familiar to us still. But in other areas, it's showing a positive trend. So this is another one of these citizen science projects that it's a great way to contribute information. And even though it seems like fun when you're contributing the information to it, it does feed into bigger things. And when you start combining the eBird trends and the BBS trends and the Christmas bird count trends, and if you start seeing really strong alignments in all those trends, then we're able to really start making good decisions to say, okay, yeah, this species is really in trouble. We need to take action and do something about the species and try to reverse these trends. So we'll go on to the next slide. And I just wanted to do one more quick plug. There's a ton more bird survey projects out there, tons of citizen science opportunities out there. This is from the Birds Canada website. You can just click on Ontario and find out. Maybe somebody, Graham or Kaylin or somebody who's on the call can put a link in here to the chat to this page. But it links to all. Thank you, Graham. Links to all the different citizen science projects that Birds Canada coordinates in the province, and you can get more information about them. They really vary from super intensive expert things like the breeding bird survey to projects that anybody can do. You can spend a couple hours of your day doing project feeder watch and keeping track of what's out in your backyard feeder, or project nest watch, where if you see a nest you can just record information about the nest. So really lots of opportunities for people of all skill levels to get involved, and all that data feeds in to help us make better decisions about birds. And I think that is a good opportunity to switch things over to Kaylin, who's going to talk about how to access all of this information.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, that's a great segue. Obviously, lots and lots of data being collected. And so this slide pertains to the atlas, but I mean, it's relevant for all, sort of bird data that we're collecting over long periods of time. But for the atlas, what can we do with, data on the occurrence and relative abundance of bird species over time, right? Because we're on our third atlas now. So Mike touched on this a little bit about, species at risk designations, recovery strategies, and, determining critical habitat to protect that. But we can also look at the role of protected areas, identifying potential protected areas or future protected areas, what their role is, and giving advice for their management. You can look at conservation planning. What are the threats to birds and their habitat? How much habitat is enough? And then there's lots of research questions that maybe we haven't thought of, but these are just some of them. Looking at phenology. So when do the birds come back? Is that changing as compared to, what it used to be? When do the birds start nesting? When do they leave the nest? Looking at effects of climate change and so on. This list is obviously not exhaustive. There's so much you can do with all of the data. We have 1.5 million records of, Atlas records so far. So it's a lot of data out there. And so, yeah, I'll chat about how we can get that into the hands of lots of folks looking at conservation actions. So next slide. All right, so to access the data, you're going to want to go to the NatureCats website. And so NatureCats is where we store and manage all of our Atlas data, but there's also other databases in there as well. And I'm not sure, I think Graham, yeah, thanks so much, Graham. Graham's just put the link in the chat to get to NatureCat. So this is what you'll see when you log into that page. You'll see maybe on the next slide, I kind of point out the different things. So let's take a look. Yeah. All right. So you can filter by species, but you don't have to. You can completely leave the species blank and just search for an entire database. You can search for a particular project. So in this case, I've put the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas in there. And then I've selected all the years that the atlases have been running. So first atlas started in the 80s. So I started 1981 to present. And this is looking at Canada Goose. So these are all the atlas records on a square level for Canada Goose in the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. Next slide. You can also zoom in all the way into a square. So I've zoomed all the way into Timmins here, and you can see every record of Canada Goose that has been submitted for all three atlases. And each one of those dots is where a goose has been reported. I think the darker the color, the higher the breeding evidence. So it could be fledged young or so on. I will note that exact locations of rare or otherwise kind of species of importance are hidden. So the point will appear at the center of the square, but essentially it'll just say this species was found in this square, but not give you any further details, especially if you're, just zooming in on a public map like this. So that's one thing that we're doing to kind of protect their locations. Next slide. So like I said, you can search entire data sets instead of a single species by leaving the species section blank. So here you'll see I've just left the species blank, and I'm looking for all records from the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, Ontario Breeding Bird Atlases. Next slide. And yeah, when you're selecting a data set to download, you can see the required permissions for access. So that the first two You can see Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. The raw breeding evidence for Atlas 1 and Atlas 2 are open, but the bottom ones, the species at risk data and colonial data, are by request only. So that's, again, just to protect their locations of species at risk. Next slide. I think this is the video.
Hold on 1 second. We did
No
try
worries.
this. Trying to get it there.
I think you got to turn off your, you got to switch cursors.
What do I have to do?
You've still got your laser pointer activated, so I think you might
Yes.
have to turn that off before you can hit play.
Okay.
No, I think you
Did
still
it
got
play
it.
in this, or did you have to open it in your Google Drive, Sharon?
Yeah, maybe it is.
No, I think you were playing it before.
I was. Yeah, I can't seem to get my laser thing off.
No worries. Yeah, if the video doesn't end up working out, that's okay. I was just essentially show a video of putting a little polygon around a certain area, and oh,
Here we go.
there we go. All right. I won't give too much away then. Okay, so in this video, I draw a polygon around the Timmins area. So this is just to show that you don't have to download all of the data for all of Ontario. If you're interested in just a certain spot, then you can draw a polygon around it. And again, in this video, I'm searching for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can search for any project within that polygon area. And these are all of the records from all 3 atlases that are found inside that polygon that I've drawn. And when you go to download data, it'll show you all of the data sets that are within that polygon. So this will show Atlas 1, 2, and 3. Some of the data is open, as you see, and then some of it is by request only, like I showed before. So those rare species and colonial species data are going to be by request only. So I'll check those off, and then I'll press download. And when you press download, it asks you to log in. And so we do keep track of kind of who's downloading the data and what the data is being used for, you know, just for our own outputs. And obviously, if it's by request, then you're going to have to put a little bit more information about what you're using that data for, so that the folks that are releasing the data have that info and can make the decision on releasing it. Thanks, Sharon, for getting that video going. So I think that was it for my slides, if I remember correctly. I think it's on to you, Sharon.
All right, look at me navigating around and learning on the go. Just the learning never stops. Thank you, Mike and Kaylin. I will, in the interest of time, go pretty quickly over this section. And Emily Morris is also on the call. I work with Emily at Plenty Canada, and we're working on a project called the Two-Eyed Sting to share knowledge of Ontario's breeding birds, which long project title. Really, what we want to work with First Nations, other Indigenous organizations and communities, anything they want to do that's bird related, what your priorities are, we would like to support that. So I am the Indigenous Community Liaison for Northern Ontario, so you would work with me. Emily is acting as the Southern Ontario Liaison, and we're hoping to fill that position. So I'm your point of connection for Northern Ontario. And we want to do a number of things, resources, but also community events where we have knowledge exchanges, we do bird walks, we get people out. Just a few examples, last year with Temiskaming First Nation, we went to the Hillerton Marsh marsh with their youth guardians, and we had a day in the marsh and learned about bird monitoring. And then we practiced with Zoom units and just using nature counts and using Merlin, and spent the day with the guardians. So if you're interested in that, let me know. With 3 of Atlas volunteers, we went to Beaver House First Nation on their community day, and we talked about birds. We had a kids bird walk, and we talked to community members about birding. So that was fun. And then I met some paddlers who had paddled down the Fern and Severn rivers up in Fort Severn. And we met with community there, and the Atlasers and the community members did a knowledge exchange. And I've done a number of them this year too. So those kinds of exchanges, getting the Western science, knowledge keepers, we always include community knowledge keepers and Western science, because we're really committed to the two-eyed seeing and working in ethical space. So these are the other things that we've done. We go to powwows and other celebration and events, and we have booths. If we're invited to present at different the Matawa Water and Environment. I've been twice to the Wakotoan Indigenous Land Symposium. So different events. Just invite me and I'll show up. I will be there. And then these are the kinds of resources. So over the last year, we've really tried to get a lot of ARUs out. So I did kind of a quick math in my head. That's about 80 ARUs through our project for Northern Ontario, and also more in Southern Ontario for the Southern Ontario First Nations. So, but also binoculars and Zoom units, and we want to provide support for data interpretation. I've been giving out copies of Atlas 2 to schools and individuals and Lands and Resources Office. And we also have paper and, of course, digital versions of really helpful pamphlets on how to use nature counts, how to use Merlin, how to do digital point counts with Zoom units. So those are all resources. And then we also can support travel costs for First Nation members to go to different training events. So those are the kinds of things we can do through our project. I know I'm going super fast. So this project is a partnership with Ontario Nature, and we're primarily funded by Environment Climate Change Canada. And as Mike said, the Atlas is a collaboration. The Atlas isn't its own entity. It's a collaboration between these 5 different organizations who work on the Atlas. So some other things we've done over the past year is really wanted to support sovereignty and updating the maps to respect reserve land boundaries. So that was something that Kaylin, Mike, and Emily and I worked on, and Birds Canada, the Nature Counts people. So now when you go into the website and you download a square map, if part of that map is reserve land, it's very clearly marked and says clearly do not atlas without permission, because we really want to ensure that only data that has permission from chief and council is shared with the Atlas, or anywhere else that chief and council do or do not want it to be shared. Another thing we did was in cooperation with Mike and Kaylin again, and we hosted a one-day training event for the regional coordinators, who are volunteers again, but they coordinate within their region, all the volunteers, to really understand history of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, colonialism, meaningful engagement, and then from that sort of larger picture, so they could really understand why it's important to get permission and what bird surveying in relation to reserve lands really means. So that was I think an important step to share knowledge that we undertook. And my last slide this is a picture of the Hudsonian Godwit page in the in Atlas 2. And you can see the different things that Mike and Kaylin have been talking about that are included in the Atlas. And a big part of our project is to ask the question and hopefully get some answers. How can the Atlas 3 be useful for Indigenous people? What kind of information can be included? Bird names in different languages, significant species, cultural importance, that kind of thing. So we'd really like to have another section in here of Indigenous significance. I'm making that title up as I go, but something within the Atlas, doesn't have to be on every single bird, but that's a really important feature of what we're hoping to really change for Atlas 3 is get more Indigenous knowledge included in the Atlas. All right, so here's our email information. And I know I really rushed, but now we can take some questions, and I'll stop sharing so I can see you folks. And I know I think Kaylin's during the chat, so.
Yeah, thank you, sharing Mike and Kaylin, for giving that presentation today. That was really great. And thank you, Graham from Birds Canada, for putting all those links in the chat for us. That's really great. I'll also ask if you guys could put your contact information in the chat as well, so it is easy accessible as well. Thank you, Mike. But yeah, we are free to open it up to questions for anyone who has any questions, and I'll hand it off to Alex first.
Niawa, Miigwech, thank you very much. That was really great, really informative. I learned about a lot of new technology, and even just seeing those maps and the way you could draw a polygon seemed really great. Just out of curiosity, if we were willing to share our information with the Breeding Bird Atlas, would we we're putting monitors all over the place. Would we just send like a WAV file with those GPS coordinates? Like, how would that actually like take place? Would we send like our SD cards? What would that look like, that process of actually getting data to the powers that be? Thank you.
Oh, we both unmuted at the same time. So I guess my question would be: is it raw data, or is it like interpreted data? Like you've got the monitor out there and it's not interpreted; it's just like the raw sound files. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can. I don't know. I don't even know all the details about how it's working through the Plenty Canada stuff. So I don't know if those would go through an interpretation through Plenty Canada, or if they could. I don't see why they wouldn't be able to get incorporated into the interpretations that happen through the Atlas. So it's one of those two. We'd have to chat offline probably, work it out with Plenty, because I know they had some money to do the interpretation as well.
Yeah, we can help support that for sure.
Yeah,
because it's very easy if you have the data and it's interpreted. It's very easy for us.
Yeah, I think in general, even the amount that we'd have to send to actually break that down, we just really started experimenting, trying to get our system down of like recording times and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's been really an incredible opportunity. Like I was kind of saying in the chat, we're exploring a lot of like different successional stages of managed forests, and just even pairing this with like dead wood surveys and seeing if that's going to have any impact. Like, we're really trying to do a full holistic analysis of like the forest and how the birds are interacting with these forests. So I think it'd be really valuable. And like I said, I believe Wakotawin's doing a big canoe trip this year, so that would likely be access to some like I don't exactly know where they're going. I'm not much of a paddler, believe it or not, but I figure if they took a recorder with them, that would just also just provide that vital information. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it sounds awesome, the stuff that you're working on. Alex, I'd love to chat with you offline. I did my master's work on kind of similar stuff. I was working on like bird communities in relation to forest management in around the Timmins area. So it sounds like we should connect. And yeah, when it comes to the interpretations, we usually do some randomized, like we record way more sound files than we ever interpret by a human. So we usually have some randomized sort of sampling that goes on where we say, okay, we're going to pick a random, 10% of all the audio that was recorded, because if you're paying a person to sit there and listen to it, it adds up really fast. If you've got 100 hours from one station, and we can usually get what we need about the bird community structure from a subset of that.
Yeah, and to add on to the canoe trips, Vicky beat me to the punch in the chat, but yeah, Mushkegowuk Council has a few Zoom recorders as well. So definitely get in touch and we can connect you with those as well. Going down to see if there's any other questions in the chat. Doesn't look like it. Do we have anyone who has any questions that wants to raise their hand or speak on it?
Hi, it's Kathy from Attachment First Nation. This is my first time actually knowing about all this. I had the privilege of talking to Sharon yesterday, and yeah, I really wish I would have gotten on board with this a few years back when you guys were starting. Talking with Sharon yesterday, so mine was again, Mike. It's really good hearing that it was some of the stuff done in forestry. So, there's a lot going on around Matachewan First Nation, and I've been really looking for forestry to get some of this data, collected of what's out there now and how, everything that's happening on the ground is really changing the direction of our bird species. Now, I do have that Cornell lab on my phone, so I did, but I don't really know how to use it that well. I'm more or less playing with it. I'm out there just doing the voice recorder type thing to see what type of birds on there. And I see you guys use that in there too. Now, those voice identification, are they pretty accurate? Like in that Cornell lab app?
Yeah, so the app that Kathy's talking about, for those of you who haven't tried it out, is called Merlin Sound ID. It's amazing. It's really good. It's not perfect. I mean, nothing's perfect, but it makes some mistakes, especially with some really difficult species. So there's, for an example, up in your neck of the woods, there's a species pair called red-eyed vireo, and then another one called Philadelphia vireo. And, I don't even think the birds can always tell themselves apart. So the computer has not figured that one out. So luckily for people like Kaylin and Graham and Gregor and I, we're not out of a job quite yet. We still need humans to do the verification, but it's getting pretty good. So we tell people use it as a learning tool and to help you learn your birds, but don't rely on it as the sole way to identify something. You can use it and say, okay, it says there's a rose-breasted grosbeak singing. Does that make sense? Can I track it down and confirm that's really what it is? But yeah, in some ways, I'm happy.
it does show you like a picture of the bird in that, and it'll tell you if it's rare or, like that. So, um, would you be able to identify that way too? Like say if I took photoshots of what it's saying in there, like I was on St. Joe's Island and it showed like some different species that are coming in there. And I know St. Joe's Island is really unique with all the different, birds and everything up in there too. So, but would that be useful with something like that? If you started seeing an abundance of new species in an area, would you be able to identify it from what it's saying that the bird is looking like, or if you had a picture of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have an actual photo of the bird, for sure. But with Merlin, you can actually copy the recording. So Merlin gives you the ability to save the recording from a recording session. And if you've got that, then somebody that can do the interpretations can definitely use that to say, yep, that's what it is. If it's the Philadelphia Vireo thing, then I'll probably say, well, I'm not totally sure. But so yeah, you can do an export. The Merlin has a help file that explains how to save the recording, and you can send it to somebody who is an expert with the sound identification and be able to confirm that way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yes, thank you, Sharon. Like I said, I'm really going to get into it with our forestry around here because there's so much going on, so much clear cutting, and those trees they're leaving in for the birds just don't make sense to me because I'm out in the middle of it and I never see any on them. So thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's also another app that I discussed in our previous webinar. It's called BirdNet, and you're able to actually do a recording of the bird call that you hear, and it will give you a probability of what that bird is most likely. So that's another resource that you can use in giving you the probability, being like it's probably 90% this bird. So you can kind of take it with caution as well to know, okay, there might be some wiggle room. So that's another resource that you can use as well.
I know we're over time, but I saw a message from Sammy that Sammy has a
Yeah.
question. So
Yeah, I wanted to find out if we can get training. I understand you need to be certified to, I'm not really sure how it works, but I talked to a colleague that you need to get trained, certified to be able to use satellite tracking systems. I'm really interested in that because our birds go all the way to South America. I would like to find out where they go, and I'm also interested in I forgot what you call them, Arctic terns. Some of them come and following the river. According to Audubon, they thought they go around the ocean and come down Hudson Bay. I guess they breed here in the river, and there's a big colony not far from here. I wanted to put some satellite tracking devices. They're really easy to catch too, and also the Hudsonian godwit. That's the plan for the future, I guess. But I think we should get training for that so we can track our birds.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Greg or you might be able to answer that one better than me. Putting you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Graham or Sammy, we'd be delighted to speak with you about exactly that sort of question. We have sort of a expanding project that Graham and I are both really involved with. It's all about trying to create new projects that communities in the north are initiating. If you have questions exactly like that, like your Arctic tern or Hudsonian godwit example, the technology that you mentioned, probably one is called MODIS. We talked a little bit about it in an earlier presentation, but why don't we maybe, oh, okay, great, got your email there. Maybe Graham, you can drop your email and mine in the chat. But that's exactly the sort of thing. The timing is amazing because we actually we have some resources to help develop that sort of project. And it's perfect. It'd be awesome, in fact. And I personally am really interested in that sort of question because Graham and I have both done some work in the higher Arctic and seeing some of the birds that people sometimes thought were just going sort of north and around Hudson Bay, Hudson Strait, and down the coast. But yet we're learning better that some of them are going straight south, picking up the Ottawa River and, following routes like that south. So let's follow that up. I'll make sure we catch your email. Thank you for that question.
All right, great bird questions. So we are over time and we've had the opportunity to answer a few questions, so that's great. If you have any other questions, everybody has put their emails that I've spoken to in the chat, so feel free to reach out to them. Or of course, if you missed it by accident, you're welcome to email me as well, and I can connect you with the right people. As I said before, this is our third and final webinar of the Introduction to Bird Migrant webinar series. So thank you everybody for joining us, whether you join for all three or individual ones, that's great. These are being recorded and we're just a little delayed in being able to make them shareable, but our goal is to hopefully next week have them all up to be shared. So if you missed it out or have colleagues that would like to watch this as well, they'll be made shareable soon. And just before we log off, I just want to make a plug that although this is the end of our Introduction to Bird Monitoring webinar series, I will be hosting a Monitoring with Trail Cameras webinar next week. The invitation will go out tomorrow, but it will be the same time, 11 to 12 on Thursday next week. So stay tuned for that. But I want to wish everybody a great day and looking forward to hopefully seeing some familiar faces next week. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Miigwech.